an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, EU leaders met with Turkey at the weekend and they've agreed a deal to try and stem the flow of migrants travelling through the country and into Europe. Turkey's agreed to tighten its border and reduce the number of people leaving its shores and heading to Greece and then onwards into the rest of Europe. 720,000 migrants have arrived in Greece so far this year, out of a total of over 850 who have come into Europe. But Turkey won several big concessions in return, and as part of the deal, the EU will give Turkey an initial €3 billion to help Syrian refugees in the country. Turkish citizens will be able to travel to Europe visa-free within a year, as long as certain conditions are met, and negotiations on Turkey joining the EU will be reopened. The Turkish Prime Minister said it was an historic day in Turkey-EU relations. Some say the EU has been too generous. But German Chancellor Angela Merkel said Turkey should not be left alone to deal with the migrant crisis. And we're joined now by the UKIP MP, Douglas Carswell.
Hi.
Welcome. What's wrong with this deal?
I can see from Turkey's point of view why it's a good deal, but I think it's a pretty disastrous deal for Europe and a bad deal for us. I mean, first of all, they get EU membership negotiations to resume. Now, I wouldn't want EU membership on a friend, and I'm a friend of Turkey, and I think it would be bad for them. But they get £2 billion a year, 3 billion euros, 400,000 pounds of 400 million of which we contribute to. But 400,000 refugees per year will now be shared out amongst the Schengen countries. Now, of course, we're not in Schengen, but once you've been allocated to a Schengen country and you've got your residency papers, you will have the right to come and live in this country. Imagine that you're part of the quota that gets allocated to Portugal or Italy, where there's high unemployment. The moment you get your residency papers, you can move from Portugal to Peckham or Italy to Ipswich, and no one's asking whether we agree with this. And I think it's a really bad deal for us.
OK. Caroline Lucas, what do you say to that?
Well, I have some serious misgivings about this agreement as well, perhaps for slightly different reasons than Douglas, but I think that Turkey's human rights record is pretty appalling. I think that the role that they're playing in the crisis in Syria is pretty unhelpful. And so the idea that we're just going to open doors now to them seems to me to be wrong. I mean, if they were going to be part of negotiations to be part of the EU, there are all kinds of things they would have to put in place first: the independence of the judiciary, human rights, a whole range of qualities that they need to do.
But for all these reasons, no one expects Turkey to be a member of the
but
EU
in a sense,
for the
they're
foreseeable future.
No, but they're already getting a key benefit that would have come to them from being full members of the EU, which is precisely the ability to move around the EU at will without having to show papers or to have any visa restrictions. And that is a concern.
You know, the fact that 75 million Turks will have unrestricted, non-visa requiring access from October. Now, people say, you know, that doesn't confer on them permanent right of residence. But, you know, Europe doesn't have a way of logging people in, so they're going to stay in. How do we know that people coming into the Schengen area from October are not simply going to remain there? And once they've obtained residency rights, they will, I'm sure, move to this country.
So why didn't the British government oppose this if it was so bad?
Indeed. You may notice that I'm not a defender of the current government. Indeed,
I've noticed that.
I think that David Cameron has allowed the European Union to negotiate on our behalf with Turkey, and it's yet one more reason why we're better off leaving the European Union. The European Union has lost control of its migration policy. It's lost the ability to negotiate well. We would be much better taking back control and striking our own arrangements with the world.
Obviously, you don't agree with that, but the European Union clearly felt it had to do something to try and at least get a grip of this uncontrolled migration that is currently coming in. And even though we've moved now, as of today, into the winter months, it will become, I suspect, a humanitarian crisis. Absolutely. Even worse now. They felt they had to do something, and didn't they use what tools they have available, which is money and some agreement? They know that they can't put a fence up. They know that it can't be Fortress Europe.
I mean, I think they're certainly right to recognise that the situation in those refugee camps is getting really, really desperate. People are in desperate poverty and cold and hungry. And yes, absolutely, finances should be going to support people in those refugee camps. And I think Britain ought to be doing more as well, although we have got a good record on that.
Well, we seem to do more than everybody.
Well, I would like us to use that position that we have really to be talking to our EU counterparts to have actually stepped up the finance that they were putting into the pot, rather than opening the doors in the way that they have to a country, as I say, that has such an appalling human rights record and would not be in a position to join the EU under any circumstances, given that record right now.
If a Turkish citizen takes advantage of this visa-free travel to come into the Schengen area, that's what it covers, they'll still have to show their Turkish passport at the British border if they want to come here, won't they?
Correct. But if you're allowed into Europe and there's no system in Europe to log people in, you will just stay in. In America, if you go to America, they have a technology-driven system that means you're logged in and you're logged out. The London Underground, when you log in using your Oyster card, it logs you out. The technology exists, but Europe simply doesn't have it. So it's allowing 75 million people unrestricted access into Schengen with no way of logging them in or logging them out.
Was there a sense of desperation, do you think, about Europe in this, as to why it's agreed with this on Turkey? Because that's an interesting point about the log in and log out. And there is no real political will, even in Germany, which used to be a big supporter of Turkey, to give Turkey full membership, but it's been kind of dangled there to try and get this agreement. I mean, the idea that President Hollande, this side of a rather difficult election he's got coming up in May 2017, would agree to Turkish membership is inconceivable.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I think it's a slightly cynical move. I think that obviously people are very worried about vast numbers of refugees coming, and in a sense they're trying to outsource the problem to leave it to be Turkey's problem, and to let's shove them a bit of money, give them a few benefits, and let's hope that we can close our eyes to it. And for that reason, it's really worrying too.
Andrew, a few years ago, the problem was Europe not being able to manage its currency, and that crisis is still going. Now we see Europe not being able to provide basic leadership over the migration crisis. Maybe the problem is that Europe, as currently constructed, simply can't organise the affairs of 500 million people this way, and maybe we need to leave the European Union and take back control.
It's such a shame that's always where you end up, because I would like to agree with so much of your analysis. But you know, when we blame the EU for that, I think we need to be clear that the people that we're blaming are the current governments of the EU. The EU institutions have actually done a pretty good job at doing
Caroline,
this.
I don't blame the EU. I blame successive British administrations that have signed us up to this failing.
All right, two quick questions since I've got you here. Have you made up your mind how you're going to vote on the Syrian motion tomorrow?
I'm genuinely undecided. Right. On Privy Council time.
Okay, so you haven't decided?
I haven't decided.
All right. And are you going to win Oldham?
We're still very much the underdog, but, you know, it could happen. Let's wait and see.
Okay, thank you very much.